Jack Maher. Welcome to the Relentless Growth Podcast. I'm here with my good friend Chase Calhoun. We're excited to bring you another episode today. This episode is going to focus on developing and entitlements and kind of the process and pitfalls that go along with that. But before we get into the meat of the episode, we're going to start this like we start every episode with a little bit of an update and a win. So Chase, take it away. What's going on in your world?
Yeah, good morning. How's it going? I think for me this week, I'm going to do a personal one. So we just got back into town. I took my family out to Colorado this week for a Fam Abundance event, which is related to the Go Abundance group that we're both a part of, but it's geared specifically towards families. So that was really good time with the family, just some good family time and spending some time working on stuff like goals and core values and rhythms, similar to a lot of the stuff we work on in our businesses, but for our family specifically. And then on the tail end of that trip, Nico and I went out to California for a quick guys trip, a father-son trip, and we did it's Bedros Koulian puts on this. It's called the Squire program. It's kind of like a 1 day, I call it like a boot camp type father-son deal, and it's supposed to be like a rite of passage type thing for Nico. So it was like a really hard day of exercise. It was interesting because it was like the hardcore drill instructor guy spent some time talking about the same stuff, setting family values, goals, and rhythms. It was like polar opposites a little bit, and like the Go one's a little bit softer presentation and a little bit different way of putting it out there compared to the ex-Marine drill instructor guy, but it was the same idea, which I thought was very interesting. So it was a good time. How about you?
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, I decided whether to go personal or work. This is again just real life stuff. Personally, we're going through potty training with our first right now with Jane. So that's been fun, challenging, all the stuff. But I feel like we've hopefully we're crested the 50% mark, and so we're on the downward slide now. But just one of those real life things that has got to be done, and so. It's been a win just to get to go through that. Hasn't always been the most fun, but it's a win. And then just kind of a general work update. We've talked about in the past, it looks like in just a couple of days here in our city in Spring Hill, Tennessee, is where we operate. They are going to pass like a sewer moratorium. And so we're still dealing with that, figuring out what that means for our business. Thankfully, we've expanded geographically a little bit, but just kind of a little update kind of plays into the entitlements and things like that we're talking about today. There's other factors that can sometimes be at play. So that's kind of an update into our world.
It's interesting. We're going and we're going to dig into the development entitlement process, but we're going through the process of entitling a piece of land. Going to take it all the way through development. One of the engineers that we interviewed was saying that he works a lot. So we're in central Arkansas. He works a lot in northwest Arkansas, which has been basically booming. It's kind of like Spring Hill. It's been expanding rapidly up there over the last couple of years. They're running into that same problem up there. And so I think 2 or 3 of the municipalities out there maxed out their sewer systems unbeknownst to them. And if like put these like stop work, sewer moratoriums on like these development projects that are like, he said some of them are like well into being built and now they're at a standstill. And so it's kind of wild, but it just goes to show that some of this stuff you can't really see coming. So hopefully it doesn't slow you guys down too much.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. But yeah, kind of what we're going to tackle today is taking kind of the entitlement process and just kind of breaking it down as in a conversation, but step by step on, what you should do, things you need to look out for, the pitfalls. So just kind of the way I would want to start this conversation is like, it's really important to know, if you're looking at a piece of property and you're looking to do something on it, there's a lot of different ways you can go. And I know Chase knows a lot about some by right stuff from what he's been able to do lately as well. But, there's by right zoning. And so there's the zoning that exists on the property right now. Anything you do under what's allowed already, you have to get approval to build your project to make sure it complies with city regulations, but you don't have to get anything rezoned. And so that's a big benefit if the piece of property you're buying or that you have already has that. But if you do have to get it rezoned, then that opens up a political process, where you've got to go before councils or boards or whatever it is, or your engineer does, and you have to generally convince them of what you want to do with the project, that it's going to be good or it's going to fill a need or whatever it is. And there's certainly the ability for them to say no. So that's kind of the base of what you start out with, is with a raw piece of land. Either it's got some zoning on it, or it's zoned agricultural or something like that. And that's kind of the first thing to establish, is where you're at in that process. And you've done a lot of some by right stuff with ADUs and things like that. So maybe talk a little bit about that, Jason, like some of the flexibility you do have with existing rules.
So we're going through it right now. I will say that it wasn't well planned. We got a little bit lucky, lucky or blessed, because it just kind of happened to work in our favor. But last year we bought a failed subdivision. So it was a fully developed subdivision that failed back in like the '08 crash, and it just been tied up in court and transacted a couple times and just was lingering around. We wanted to go in there and build townhomes because they make sense for build to rent, as to where single family homes can make sense, but it's a lot tougher, especially in a nice neighborhood. This is a nice neighborhood. And we tried to go through the rezoning process with that existing subdivision. So we didn't want to change the plots of the subdivision. The lot sizes were perfect for what we need. Utilities in place were more than adequate for what we were trying to do. And we attempted to take it through the rezoning process to allow for duplexes, which would have been favorable for that area. We had a ton of pushback from the neighbors and the surrounding subdivisions. It ended up getting, shut down at Planning Commission. We tried to contest the Planning Commission deal at the city council level, or I think they call it the city board level here, because what we were trying to do was well within the plan density and everything for the city's plan density for that area. So we've been fully compliant with what they want for that area. But it's just funny. It got a little bit political. There was one lady on the council who you could tell was very against it. And she took something we did personally, I think. And it was very clear she rallied all the other council members. And so it's just funny because it can be very political. And we weren't on the right side. And so it got shut down pretty hard. At the time this was happening, the state of Arkansas passed a by right ADU law. And so it is a state law that supersedes any local laws that are going to allow ADUs by right, attached or detached. And so we had to kind of tweak the plans of what we were wanting to do and make it a single family home with an attached ADU, but it still allows 2 units per lot. And we're in the final stages. So there's a 90-day kind of grace period where that law can get contested. It hasn't been contested to my knowledge. And so I think in 2 or 3 days, we're going to pull permits on the first 6 of those and go in there and build those. Basically, we're still going to build townhomes by right now, and we shouldn't get any pushback. I'm a little bit worried we may deal with some legal issues from some of the neighbors that will be in the right. It'll get resolved, but we'll be able to move forward. So the one thing I would just say is, when you're looking at land, it's a good idea to have a backup plan, or at least know what's going to be allowed there by right. When we're looking at some of these projects now, it's like, if we know they're zoned residential, we at least want to know the lot sizes and stuff. So if we're trying to do like a build to rent subdivision with duplexes, we tie it up or we buy it. We try to take through that rezoning process, and it gets turned down. At least we know what we can pivot to by right on that land without them being able to shut it down so easily. So the one we're going through right now, that's something that we're.
Yeah, and I think that's an important topic you bring up with zoning, lot sizes, things like that. That is going to vary broadly in every municipality you operate in. And so outside of like the base of this process that we're talking through, I think is probably fairly consistent, from place to place. But a lot of the specific things that you're going to need to know to do your project are very municipality, city, whatever it is, town-based. And so the zoning that you want to get or need to get on the property is going to be, after you establish what's already there, that's going to be the next most important component, is what zoning do you need? Do you need their highest zoning? Do you need, and it can vary. Like, we're doing a project right now in a community that's a little farther out, and we're doing single family houses. But in that municipality, we have to go for their highest density zoning. And so traditionally, if we were doing a project in Nashville, which we don't, and I'm hoping we never do, the highest density zoning would be hundreds of units an acre. It'd be a big building, hundreds of units an acre. We're dealing with their densest product, and we're at a little over 2 units an acre. So those things are going to vary widely based on where you are. But the perception is what matters. You talk about political, you talk about public feedback. So just going for the densest code is going to, sometimes that results in public feedback. And so, knowing what that looks like, I think having conversations, if you can, different places have different systems, like the city of Columbia, just south from us, where we do some projects, they have a system in place where you pay it's a super small fee, $50 or something like that, and you reserve a meeting with planning staff ahead of submitting anything like that. And we've done it multiple times where you just say, hey, here's what I'm thinking on this piece of property. And they'll give it to you straight. And they'll say, well, here are the challenges that I see from an infrastructure perspective, from a roads perspective. Or they might say, hey, that makes total sense. Here's all the other stuff that's coming in the area. Because that's the other thing that you really need to know is what else is already on the books, or what else is in the works. And so those things need to come together to make your project make sense. And dealing with planning staff, having some preliminary conversations, especially if you're going to buy property, allowing yourself plenty of due diligence time and making sure that you're having those communications with planning staff quickly and early to at least get their feel on how it's going to work out. That most of the time, or all the time, they don't have the final say. It's going to be a political body that has the final say, but they're used to going through it. They're used to dealing with it, and they're going to be able to give you great advice on the front end.
Yeah, that is great advice. It's actually something. So we're going through right now. We under contract on a piece of land, not in Little Rock, in a surrounding city that I'm hoping is a little bit more development friendly. It seems that they have a need for housing. So far, it seems like they are a little bit more friendly towards the development than maybe the city of Little Rock is. But that's exactly what we're doing. So we interviewed a couple engineers. We picked the engineer we want to move forward with, and they just simply reached out to the city. They set a meeting with the planning department. So we're going to go sit down. They call it a pre-application meeting. So before we submit that application for rezoning, we're going to sit down with the city that we're doing the development in, and they're going to look at it and give us feedback. The one thing that I do find is interesting that I've noticed is the first thing obviously we do is look up the zoning for that municipality. And then we try to determine what zoning we're going to need to go to. And the city has kind of 3 different densities. The problem is when we reach out to the city and we're like, hey, which one do you think we should get? It's like they're telling us one, and the engineer thinks it should be the higher density one. And so kind of what I told the engineer is let's just go talk to them about it. Whichever one they recommend, especially if it's the lower density one, we're going to get less pushback. Let's just go with that one as long as they're okay with it. And so is to where other municipalities like Little Rock is very clearly outlined with their densities. It's this, R2 is this, R4 is this exactly. There's just a little bit more loose in how it's worded. And so there could be some flexibility there. So I'll be curious to see how that meeting goes. And I guess kind of the next step after that meeting is we'll submit the application for rezoning, and it'll go to the planning commission. And if the planning commission approves the rezoning, we're good to go and would move forward in the planning process for the actual.
No, and I think you make a great point there with whatever you go in hoping or planning you're going to get, you've got to always leave a little bit of flexibility. Whether it's elected officials, whether it's staff, they're all going to have things that they look for in a project. And they're all going to be different, whether it's, green space is big right now, whether it's, a playground, whatever it is, there's always going to be little things that either staff or the elected officials are hoping for or shooting for as part of a project, that you need to be able to incorporate in if at all possible, because it's going to help your chances. Good for the community, helps your chances. And the other thing is just having it sounds lofty, but the spirit of cooperation, working with the city, not saying, hey, here's what I'm going to do. I'm doing it here. This is the only way I'm going to do it. And I'm sure some people have success with that. But we don't. And I think in general for Chase and I, we're both people who operate in a singular location with maybe some branches outstretched, but we plan on being where we are for a long time. And so it's really important to keep and establish those relationships. I think you do see consistently, we've seen it in our market where people do come in from out of town. They sell an incredible vision. And, 5 years later, they're doing projects in West Virginia and they're not worried about finishing their project right. And so that does leave a bad taste in cities' mouths about developers, unfortunately. And so we've got to try and combat that in what ways we can by being consistent, having regular communication with them, and just trying to make the project work for their vision for the city as well as yours.
Yeah, one thing I think you touched on, I've heard this advice from other people, other developers as well, is like at the end of the day, like it's the developers' money, right? And they're the ones that are spending the money for the development. They're the ones that got to make sure it's feasible and it's going to work. And your engineers are going to design it. But it's like if the city is giving advice on what they would like to see or what they would like to see incorporated, and it's not like a deal breaker. So if it's a simple, like a little bit of green space, or hey, we'd really like to see, sidewalks on both sides of the road, even though technically, maybe it's only required in that city on one side. Just those little things like that. If they're not too costly where they're going to break the project, and you can make the city officials feel like they're involved, kind of like in the design process. From what I've heard, again, this is newer for me, but those kind of things go a long way when you're taking them through that approval process. If you can kind of let them feel like they're involved in the design and their inputs being heard and stuff like that. So that's one thing as we go into this meeting that's important to be very aware of. If they're making recommendations for stuff they like to see, even if it's not required by code or required by law, and it's not going to be a deal breaker for us, it's definitely something that we'll try to incorporate, because my understanding is that can make things a lot easier to get pushed forward. And then I also I'm looking at it again, unfortunately, some municipalities are hard to deal with. But as we're going into this new municipality, I'm looking at this as a really good first run. It's kind of like if we do work for a customer or if we do work with a new vendor, it's we're going to try it with one kind of smaller one. If it goes well, we can show that we have a good reputation. We do what we say we're going to do. I have a feeling that's going to help us, dramatically when we go to do another one in that same city. So it's important to me, at least on the first one in this city, to kind of under promise and over perform, just like we would with the customers. Like we treat the city almost like they were a customer or a business partner or something like that. We want to make sure that we're doing what we say and we do a good job. And then that way, the next time we go to ask to get something approved, it's probably going to be even easier.
No, I think you're 100% spot on with that. And then just to kind of keep rolling with the progression, after that pre-application meeting, you're going to take their feedback as long as, there have been times when we've left those meetings and they said, hey, I'll be honest, there's no chance, or maybe you're a couple years away, maybe you're a little early. There's problems you've got to solve first before you submit. That's happened to us a lot of times. And so you take that meeting, take the feedback from your pre-application meeting, you solve the problems, or you wait, or you do whatever you need to do, and you can always push forward. I mean, there's no rule that says you can't, but it's usually good to take the advice. And so, just to give a real tangible example, we submitted a project 3 years ago, and they told us, "Hey, you need to solve the sewer issue in this category, in this area of the city." And we said, "Okay, all right." It took us 3 years to do it, but we cooperated with 2 other property owners. We are sharing the cost of building a pump station for sewer. We've got a force main laid out to be built. So that's an example of, and it's a warning more than anything, of once you get into the entitlement and development side of things, timing is pretty much out the window. You can have goals, you can have things that you're shooting for, But your delay when you're building a house, a bad delay is 30 days. Development projects, years are not out of the question for things to be delayed. So not keeping all your eggs in one basket, making sure you've got time built into what you're working on. Because in this case, and we got on a project we're working on in Columbia, we got turned down the first time we submitted it after 3 years of working on it, getting a force main together. And so we're going to continue to work on that. And I'm hopeful that we can get to the finish line. But especially with where we are at in our business cycle, where you've had a couple of years of explosive growth, and then you're kind of coming down off of that, and people are, whether it's water or sewer, cities are finding these problems. And so it's a tough time to be getting into development if you're new. I wouldn't lie to anybody. But the most important thing is having an accurate time frame, as accurate as possible, because it can dramatically shift just based on really little things.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, I guess maybe I got a couple questions that'll benefit me and hopefully some other people, just because we're in the midst of this process. So we've got a piece of land tied up. We're going to take it through the rezoning process. I'm not expecting any pushback. So say everything goes perfectly, which it probably won't, but say it does, and in 2 or 3 months from now, we've got this piece of land that's been rezoned to allow for what we want to build. My understanding is the next steps would be to have the engineers fully design the project, and then we'll take it to the city for approval. I guess what kind of advice or recommendations do you have, or just things to watch out for once we get to that? So we've got the zoning we need. Now we're taking it to the city for actual approval so that we can put a shovel in the dirt.
A couple important things there. Once you have zoning, the biggest thing, which I know but just for everybody listening out there, all you have to do if you have the underlying zoning is comply with city regulations. So that's what your engineer is trying to do at that point, is just make sure they check the boxes of whatever they say, either a neighborhood, a building, whatever it is, whatever that has to meet, you're trying to check those boxes. And so that's the most important thing. But then another couple things that vary depending on city to city is sometimes they require full construction documents up front, which is a big expense. But also, if they change things, it's more costly to make those changes. So usually they have like a preliminary plat submittal is what they at least call it in our area. And so you can submit just your layout, get their buy-in on that, and then you can proceed to full construction docs later on. And so that's kind of the normal process. And that's the best way to do it, in my opinion, because it gives you a chance to get another round of feedback and just get farther down the line before you spend the bulk of your money on engineering is going to be on your construction documents. And so getting that feedback, getting that stuff, I think that's kind of the next step there.
Cool. One thing that I think we're going to do that was recommended by the engineer, once we know that we think we're going to be able to get the zoning approved, is go ahead and spend a little bit of money on some geotech testing, just testing the soil and stuff, making sure there's no surprises there. And not necessarily it's not going to kill the deal, but just so that as we do go down the design process and we start bidding out all the dirt work, we have like a true grasp of what the actual costs are going to be as far as dirt work. So that's the only other little thing that seems to...
Well, that's a real important thing, and it's kind of separate from the entitlement process, but cities can require a lot of things. Some things that take a long time. Like here, we have to do a flood study, which is essentially mapping. If you have unmapped floodplain on your property, then you have to map it, and so that can take a couple months. And the results of it can impact your project. If you have a stream that you have to cross, it's not necessarily usually before the municipality issues a grading permit. In Tennessee, they call it an ARAP, which is permission from your state authority to cross that stream with infrastructure in some way. And so there's a lot of outside of like the traditional approval process with the city, which is usually fairly straightforward. There's a lot of other things from like a land structure. Geotech is a super important thing to have done. but then just other things that can impact that project and can delay it that are within the city's purview, but it may be state law. It may be a bunch of different things that you need to account for that really can just add time and complexity. And if that geotech, we've had everything over the years. We've had sinkholes, we've had bad dirt. And anything. It's the joke in construction, but anything is solvable with time and money. There are lots of buildings built on sinkholes. There's lots of things built on, if you undercut bad dirt, you can build on it. There's a solution for everything. But once you get in that world, every solution is expensive. There's no inexpensive way to fix land. And so knowing as much as you can on the front end, especially so that you can negotiate with a seller if you have to. In general, retrading is not something that we like or want to do, but sometimes it's necessary. If you've got if the whole property needs extra work, then it needs extra work and it's not worth as much. So those are kind of parallel tracks that you need to be running while you're going through that process. Because what we usually do, we do it both ways. Sometimes we buy raw land, knowing that it's unentitled, and then we go through the process later on. We just have a confidence or a faith that it's going to work out in the end. Other times, like you're going through, it sounds like we have a contract in place where if we don't get the zoning we want, then we're not going to buy the property. And so you've got to spend some money to get there, but you've also got the flexibility that if, hey, it doesn't work out, I'm not committed to buying this property. And so you've got to really rush to jumble all your due diligence time and process into that contract period to make sure you're doing everything you can.
Yeah, that's awesome. We may have to do a follow-up podcast in the near future here about the once it's fully approved, the construction process to take it to where you're ready to go vertical. But to kind of wrap it up, I guess the other question I would have is once the project is fully approved by the city, that project itself, as long as there's no expiration dates on it, will run with it at least for a short period of time. So it gives you some time to set up and do the construction as long as you're not making any changes, correct?
Yeah, so I think it's probably different. State law in Tennessee it's a couple different things. So normally, once you get your property rezoned, that zoning is there forever. Generally, cities can change it, but generally zoning is there forever. And so, if you're doing a by right project in a zoned area, even if that project expired, say the WIC ran out on it and the project expired, the zoning would still be there. You would just have to go back, and if codes rules had changed, you would have to update your project to current codes. So that's something that does happen from time to time. But the other side of that is if you do have a zoned an approved project, you've got vested rights. And I'll give my podcast caveat of I'm not a legal expert. This is not legal advice. But in Tennessee, generally, initial vesting, you have about 3 years to break ground. And then once you break ground, you have an additional 2 years to go vertical. So you have 3 years to break ground. You have 2 years to get to a point where you can go vertical. And then depending on whether it's a phased or unphased project, you have up to 15 years total to complete the project. And so it is an important thing. It's an important thing to know, because if this is something, if it's something where you get a project approved and the economy changes and you decide not to pursue it, there are timeframes associated with that. And so making sure you're aware of those, making sure, obviously, if your zoning or your entitlements run out, that property is less valuable in general. Whether you can go back and get them or not, it's a little bit less valuable. And so understanding, great question, but understanding the timeframes associated with approvals is going to be a key for sure.
I think it's also worth noting it's important if you're looking at development projects that are being listed or sold is already entitled. Because like we've looked at some, so we've never done a multifamily project, but we've looked at some land, and it's got the multifamily zoning, and they'll advertise it. Oh, it's been approved for X amount of units, but you really got to pay attention to how long ago that project was approved and whether or not it's still good, or if you're going to have to step in there and completely redo it and take it back through the approval. So the zoning may be correct. But if the people in the city have changed or the codes have changed, that entire project they designed may no longer be usable. You may have to spend the money to take it through and redesign the project and take it back through approval. So I would say it's just worth like paying attention to if you're looking at land that's being advertised is having the project already approved, that whatever was approved is still still in place, or if you're going to have to go back through some of that process. Like you said, the zoning shouldn't change, and so the zoning should be fine. But the project requirements could be changed, and it could potentially have to be
just another thing
not approved.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And another thing to jump in on with buying entitled property, that's a big thing that I see a lot. And then we'll wrap up at this, but I think we do need to do another episode on this. Is that a lot of people, and this is not a knock on them, a lot of people, their business is buying property, getting entitlements, and selling it. And they don't develop, and they won't develop. And that's a lot less headache, a lot easier. That I'm not knocking these people at all. But from a developer and builder perspective, you've got to be really careful looking at those projects, because where we talked about, doing things the city wants or doing things to help a project get approved, if you're not the one that's going to spend the money on those things, it's really easy to go overboard and, design in a lot of features, a lot of things that are great on the surface, and that, man, they helped you get that project easily approved. But where you talked about things that aren't a deal killer, there may be things on there that are a deal killer, that are super expensive, that are hard to execute, that aren't going to work. And so that's the thing that I've seen on some entitled projects they're selling where, man, the project looks so cool, I want to live there, but it might not make money, And so you've got to be careful where even if you're buying that entitled project, you may have to go back and fight battles to undo things that they promised. And so it's just something to look out for. And our general thing is, once something is shown on the plans, it's incredibly difficult to get it removed, whatever that is. It doesn't matter if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just, that's the way it is. Once a project is approved, it's tough to go backwards. And so that's just a general warning that buying entitled stuff is useful. It saves you a lot of time on the front end because it's a time-consuming process. But there are definitely some dangers and costs that can be hidden there when you've got somebody who's not the end user spending your money, essentially. And so just something I wanted to point out to everybody. But what would be kind of the finishing takeaway from this, Chase, and any other thoughts you've had?
I think so. Again, as I start to go down this road, I think the biggest thing that I come back to or see is just trying to build relationships with the city officials that are, they may not be the final say. So like the planning commission, which I didn't know were like appointed, basically citizens, are going to be the final say in a lot of this stuff. But with the city, if they're supportive of it, it's going to go a long way. And if they're not, it's also going to go a long way. And so I think just making sure, one, that the city's on board. And then another thing I'm we talked about it a little bit, but one thing I'm looking at a lot is just doing business in cities where they want to see these kind of projects. And so I get frustrated where I'm at sometimes because it seems like they're anti-development and everybody wants affordable housing until somebody tries to build affordable housing. And then it's that whole NIMBY, not in my backyard deal. And so it's like we're looking at places close by where there's just as big of a need, but maybe the cities are going to be more supportive and just doing business there instead of banging our head in the wall somewhere where they don't want it. So I think those are the two biggest things that I'm at least seeing so far as entitlements and going through this process.
No, I think those are keys. We're seeing the exact same things here. And the only other thing I would say to people who are trying to get into this or thinking about getting into it, Chase talked about picking an engineer. That's one of the most important things you can do if you're pursuing a development project. It's important that they've got experience in the municipality you're operating in. You want to be a known face, but if they're also a known face, that it just helps. They know the little things to look for. And so that's that's going to be your most critical hire through a development process, is that civil engineer. And so that would be just kind of my last little thing on this. But I think we'll do a follow-up episode on this. I think there's a lot more we could talk about, but we're coming up on time. But I appreciate everybody listening. If you got value out of this, please give us a rating, like the podcast. We're super excited about what we've got ahead of us, and we're excited to continue to learn alongside you guys. As always, we'd love to hear from you. If we got something wrong, let us know. If there's something else that we should be talking about or that we missed, we want to hear about it. Or if you've got questions on a specific deal or anything like that, we're available, and we'd love to help with stuff like that. So just let us know. But we appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Relentless Growth Podcast. I'm Jack and Chase, and we're signing off this week. Thanks, guys.
Have a good one.